Well, I remember that Ron Paul and I, we oftentimes were the only red votes, the only no votes up on the board. Surely voting for either one of these, Democrat or Republican, is not going to change things. He who has a plan in the midst of chaos can win.
From Acapulco, Mexico, this is Anarchast.
Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. I've got a great first-time guest coming on. I actually was speaking this year at Anarchapulco in February, and I looked down, and sitting right in the front row, right in the middle seat, was Cynthia McKinney, and I knew she was coming, but I didn't know much about her. And my friend Luke Rudowski of We Are Change had been telling me over the years, he's like, you have to talk to her, you have to talk to her. And I kept saying to him, yeah, but she's in Congress. She can't be a good person. And I'm a busy guy. I just never had the time to look into it. I kept hearing her name all over the place, and I was like, seems like she's doing some good stuff, but she's in Congress, so I'm just going to kind of assume that she's not a good person. But she showed up at Anarchapulco this year and essentially came out on stage saying she's an anarchist. And, I could go through her list of accomplishments. They're quite long now that I know who she is. I've spent some time to look into her. She was numerous times in Congress. She was one of the first people to question September 11th. She was actually grilling Donald Rumsfeld on the $2.3 trillion, while the rest of the warmongers in Congress were all cheering on that bomb everyone because of this. And she's gone after so many people, actually. She was a Hurricane Katrina activism. So anytime there's some sort of good things to be done, which you think, that's sort of what the government was supposed to do, but they don't. She's there. She's a major anti-war and human rights activist. She actually tried to impeach George W. Bush, which is awesome. Love it. And went on. And actually, she pretty much got, because of all the things she was doing, kind of run out of the U.S. She's been mostly living in Bangladesh lately, teaching there. She's actually back in the U.S. right now, back in her home state of Georgia, and really hard to get a hold of her because she's really busy. But finally, Cynthia, have you on. So real true pleasure to have you on the show. And first question I ask everyone on the show, and maybe you can start there, is how did you become an anarchist?
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, I think my journey is one that basically anybody who has reached the point where I would say you and I are, even though I don't know if we're at the same point, but we're close anyway. And you look at sort of an objective reality, and then you look at your own circumstances, which is like the subjective part of it. And you compare what is with what you're being told are the objectives, policies, the rationale by our elected leaders for the various behaviors that they engage in. And that the United States, if you're a U.S. citizen, or your country, because anybody can come to this point by just looking at what their elected officials say versus what they do versus what they say they want you to do. And then all of a sudden there's this huge disconnect. So once you understand that there is a disconnect, then that sets you, or at least it should set you, on the path trying to find a way to have the kind of governance that basically reflects your values, which is what the United States government purports to be for U.S. citizens. And of course, it's the chasm between what it purports to be and what it actually is just growing tremendously. And so therefore it should not be very difficult for people to say, okay, something is fundamentally wrong. And I think there are a lot of people who have reached that point where they understand that something is fundamentally wrong, and that voting for the Democratic Party or voting for the Republican Party, or even for that matter, voting for the Green Party. I've been a Democrat and a Green. Recently, I went to the Libertarian Party, where you have people of different values that have come together and formed a political party. But surely voting for either one of these, Democrat or Republican, is not going to change things. And this is the major divide that is promoted by, quote unquote, the mainstream news. But thank goodness to President Trump, who gave us the language now that we all understand, fake news. And so we get fake news, whether it's CNN or Fox or MSNBC or CNBC, it really doesn't matter. CBS and ABC and NBC, it really doesn't matter, because all of it is fake news. We also get fake news from the foundation supported independent media. And that comes as quite a shock, because people basically thought, okay, well, I can tune into Democracy Now! Or I can tune into some of the other quote unquote independent, but only to find out that you're still getting a government narrative, particularly on the war, where the various deep state factions come together on the promotion of and the carrying out of U.S. regime change wars in certain parts of the world. So once you get there, now, what is it that is incumbent upon us to do? Then we have to go and search out alternatives to the corporate stream or the foundation stream media in order to find out what the heck is really going on. That is a journey in of itself. But once we find out what's going on, then the next step, I believe, is that we look at our system of governance, our political system, and we say, well, we've been told that indirect democracy is the perfect form of governance. But no matter where indirect democracy is practiced, we end up generally in kakistocracy. This is a topic that I talked to Luke Rutkowski about, and we had fun with, with the word. But kakistocracy basically is the most corrupt, the least qualified individuals are the ones who end up in positions of authority. And so the indirect democracy requires us to give up our sovereignty. I am an individual and I am a sovereign individual. In indirect democracy, I have to give up my sovereignty and give it over to someone else who is going to represent me in positions of authority. Then when I want something, so for example, I want a pothole repaired, I want street lights, I want sidewalks so the kids aren't walking on the street home from school, I want whatever it is, I have to go to those individuals and ask them to do what I could really do myself or organize in a way to carry out myself. And so the alternative democratic political system is one of direct democracy. So as I'm talking about the differences between indirect democracy and direct democracy, that's when I say, okay, when I was in Libya, the Libyans, this is of course before Obama and Hillary started the bombing campaign, the people, 7 million strong Libyans, were voting for whether or not they were going to subsidize education or if they were going to subsidize the price of gasoline. That was something, and all Libyans were voting on that policy in a referendum. Okay, now that is something that normally our state legislators or our members of Congress would be voting on in this indirect democracy. Another attribute of indirect democracy that is problematic for me is that we can have a country of 7 million, 70 million, or 1.2 billion. But if you have the practice of indirect democracy, some outside power can come in and say, for example, you have 535 people who are in your parliament. In our case, that's the number of members of Congress that we have, 435 in the House and then 100 in the Senate. Well, special interests only have to buy off the majority of those, half of those plus one, in order to dominate policy. And that's what we've seen in our representative democracy that we have, that people say, well, we have a republic. Well, the republic is indirect democracy. And that's what we have. It hasn't worked. It's not working. It rarely has worked. Perhaps there was a time where this was good, but maybe it's time now for us to evolve to a new type of political system. And some countries were experimenting with that. And Nigel Farage over in the UK has said that now after Brexit, the UK, the UKIP, his political party, is going to focus on direct democracy. Switzerland has always enjoyed direct democracy, but the direct democracy that was practiced in Libya was basically bombed back to the Stone Ages. So that tells me that maybe some people are allowed to practice direct democracy or advocate direct democracy, and some people are not. Now, once I began to interact with you guys, what I did was, well, I also need to mention the fact that my son came out before me as an anarchist. And so I sent him to law school. He graduates from law school and says to me, Mom, I'm not going to practice law. I said, why aren't you going to practice law? I mean, now is a fine time to tell me, but why aren't you going to practice law? Well, he said that it's corrupt. There was no way I could argue with him because I absolutely know that that's the case. And so now my son has decided that he wants to start an intentional community. He is doing organic farming. He became the compost man. Out of law school, he goes to become the compost man. And anyway, so now that is his avocation. And I think it's a wonderful thing. He needs to teach me how I can grow truly organic food by starting with the soil. Well, anyway, so he comes out as an anarchist and writes this piece about, I think the title of it was An Anarchist Theory of Justice. And that's when my son came out, which also suggested to me that I needed to do some research. And I still say that I need to do some research. I don't know all of the theory, but what I do know is that the practice of indirect democracy is not as fruitful as it should be because of not only the kakistocracy, but I learned at Anarchapulco, thank you very much, Jeff, psychopathocracy. And so then you get not only the least qualified and the most corrupt, but you get outright psychopaths who are able to go all the way to the top and become, quote unquote, respected leaders. So that that also encouraged me to look elsewhere. And then what I decided was this, that for people who are not ready to say, okay, I'm an anarchist or I'm going to advocate for anarchy. And let's be clear that anarchy does not mean chaos, right? So we're not talking about becoming a culture, a country, a civilization of chaos. But what we are talking about is becoming a culture that respects the sovereignty of individuals. Now, the final thing I want to say is this. The bridge, I can see that direct democracy can become a bridge to anarchy. And so by asking people to just take a look at alternative political systems and contemplate the nature of kakistocracy and psychopathocracy as it has occurred in our own political system, then I think people will be less afraid of thinking outside of the box that has been so significantly drawn for us by basically all of the mainstream media, as well as the foundation media. And this is really the conversation that we need to be having about the questions that I asked when I was still in Congress. What does it mean to be a U.S. citizen? What kind of country do we want the United States to be? And what are we willing to do in order to make our values, our dreams about our country come true?
Well said. I can tell why you were a good politician. You're an excellent speaker. And I can also tell why you're not in politics anymore, because you actually care about helping other people. And that just doesn't seem to fit very well in that paradigm, does it? I know that you have so many stories of just witnessing what actually happens in the halls of Congress. And as you pointed out, and it makes total sense why psychopaths gravitate to those positions of power, because they want power. Your average person who has a decent heart doesn't want to have power over other people. I don't wake up every morning and go, oh, I want to control everybody. But when you give them a place where they can do that, and that is politics, that is government, who do you expect is going to show up there? And it turned out to you. I think I only know of one other. There might be a couple more really good, decent people who are in Congress. There's yourself and Ron Paul. I think there might be one or two others, but it's very, very rare. And they usually don't do very well, do they?
Well, I remember that Ron Paul and I, we oftentimes were the only red votes, the only no votes up on the board. And when you guys had at Anarchapulco 2018, Ron Paul was your guest speaker. And so I went up to him and I said, hey, remember me? And he said, of course I remember you. And then he went on to tell me a story, of course, that I had forgotten. One of the many stories that we could share if we had time to sit down. But this story that he shared was particularly, it was touching to me, because it means that I really made an impact in just there's this theory about blink. And so Donald Trump talks about it all the time when he says, I can tell within 5 seconds whether or not I'm going to like this person. Well, that's blink. And so that was this moment that I'm about to describe for you is the blink moment of me for Ron Paul. So we were voting, and the question was, should farm animals be forced to have the RFID chip placed in their bodies? And so Paul said that I ran up to him and I said to him, I'm voting no, because the next thing they're going to want is to chip us.
That's true.
And surely enough, time does tell, right?
And what did he say to that?
Well, he didn't say, then we both just started laughing as he was recalling the moment. But, yeah. And so on that particular vote, again, and there were 2 no votes. And those 2 were me and Paul. So, in fact, interestingly, they got rid of Ron Paul ultimately in the same way, of course, the way they got rid of me was accompanied by so much, media hysteria surrounding me. But in the end, it was basically the same, redistricting. So they give you new constituents, new district lines, and then you have to gain votes from people who have never had the opportunity to vote for you before. So that's what happened to Paul, and that's what happened with me as well.
And then, of course, when he ran for president, he was speaking in front of literally 30, 40, 50,000 people in stadiums. While I guess during the primaries, whatever they call it, it was people like Mitt Romney were speaking in front of like 30 people, and most of them were like just cameramen. And of course, he didn't get the votes. Of course, the whole system is rigged. That's very obvious. You've seen it from the inside, and you bring up direct democracy as a potential way to get towards even more freedom. And that is very interesting because really anarchy in a way is direct democracy. You're voting with your dollar, with whatever you do. So if you don't like what McDonald's is doing to farm animals, don't eat at McDonald's. That's the way it should be. It shouldn't be that we get extorted. Some other guys go to Washington, a bunch of psychopaths, and then we call them up and beg them, hey, don't let McDonald's do that. It's like you vote yourself with your own dollars. So I know you talk quite a bit about direct democracy. Is this something that you work on still quite a bit, trying to get things changed in one way or another?
Well, I actually have this idea about, restoring ethical governance kind of thing. That's tagline, transforming ourselves. Transforming our government by transforming ourselves, something like that, I say. But I've got this idea rolling around in my head about something that I call power cells. And the idea behind the power cells is that we would all come together in one room at one table, and from various walks of life, from all different kinds of backgrounds, so that we could figure out common solutions to common problems and actually put together a work plan to begin resolving the local community issues. So this was my idea when I was coming up with this idea about the power cells and how we could actually implement transformational change in a way that reaches down into various communities, into our communities. And we would do these power cells on a state by state basis. Of course, you have to get the funding for the idea in order to implement this on a nationwide 50 state basis. But I do think that the foundation of the power cells, the theoretical and the practical foundation, is quite strong because it borrows from the behavioral sciences and the concept of total quality management as a way to constantly be in the improvement mode for our system of governance.
Yeah, it was interesting earlier you pointed out that most people today actually are starting to wake up how corrupt and bad government is in general. I think there was polls in the 1980s, 90s. Do you trust the government? It was like 60%, 70%. Now I think it's like 15% or something like that. So thanks to the internet, as you pointed out, the media is so controlled that people weren't able to get this information, that people are starting to wake up to how bad government is. But as you pointed out, they don't necessarily know what the other solutions are. Of course, one of them is just true anarchy. Just stop paying taxes. Everyone just go about their business. Stop listening to the cop who's telling you you owe him money because you drove 10 miles an hour too fast over some arbitrary limit. People may not be quite ready for that yet. And actually, my big question to you is, are people in the U.S. even close to ready? It appears to be the most brainwashed public in the world. You can't even talk to them except there's like, I'm left or I'm right, and there's no other way to do it. But at the same time, they totally mistrust government. What is it what's going on there? Why? Well, I actually know the answer. They're all brainwashed. But what's from your take? Like, why can't we seem to wake people up to what's going on?
Well, you know what? I think the 2016 presidential campaign is one that has helped tremendously in waking up people because we got language that we didn't have before. We've got fake news. And 20 years ago, I was trying to explain, in my own kind of way with language that was not as succinct and descriptive as fake news. Now you say fake news, everybody knows exactly what you're talking about. The other Trumpism that came about as a result of the 2016 campaign was drain the swamp. Now we absolutely know that Washington, D.C. is a cesspool, it's a swamp, and it needs to be drained. It's full of swamp monsters. We know that now. There's no argument. Before, I had to convince people, right? And it's sort of like that trust thing that you were talking about. And people like me, we had to convince people. But now, no, it's drain the swamp. What about this other Trumpism that really awakened people? And that is, the system is rigged. The system is rigged. 4 words. The system is rigged. I have been trying to say that ever since 2001. Ever since, we were given the talking points and we had to say that we were hit because we are free after September 11, 2001 happened. I've been trying to say the system is rigged. I couldn't say it with the authority of a Donald Trump. Now everybody takes for granted the system is rigged. So I think we are at a crossroads, really, where people really do understand a whole lot more than they did before, just exactly how corrupt every aspect of our governance has become.
Yeah, Donald Trump didn't come up with fake news. I've been calling it fake news for a long time. But yeah, he made it a lot more popular. But yeah, it is interesting. That is, there's some anarchists who actually kind of like Donald Trump. And part of it is because he said a few sort of true statements, right? Fake news, drain the swamp. It is a swamp. We all knew that, but he was actually saying it. What's your opinion of Trump? Because he said all that stuff, but all he seemed to do is refill the swamp. What's your take on him? Is he actually really trying to make change, or is he mostly just doing some lip service while really nothing changes?
Well, on the one hand, I would say I can't know what Trump is trying to do. I can only judge by what is actually being done. And I think that on the basis of that is the way we should gauge all of our elected officials, no matter if it's the school board members, the sheriff, or it's the president of the United States. What is it that they have done? And for members of Congress, what was the vote that they cast? So with that, I'm extremely disappointed, for example, that U.S. engagement in the wars, these regime change wars that are costing us in troops and treasure, or the troops are the treasure, so troops and treasury, that they haven't stopped. There are many points on which I would say my disappointment exists and my disappointment reigns. At the same time, I also am extremely thankful that Hillary Clinton is not in the White House, because those things that I know she did to subvert democracy or self-determination of the Haitian people. And now, of course, everybody knows about the result that was produced on her watch at her command in Libya. Those are not things that you reward people for by promoting them. No, she should actually be prosecuted, but that's a different matter. And so at least she's not in the White House, and we're not at the present time worried it seems, about World War III, although we know we would be in World War III with her having been elected to the White House. Okay, so what I will say is that Trump is disrupting business as usual. And to the extent that I don't have a stake at all in business as usual, I'm happy that Trump is disrupting. Whatever he disrupts, I'm right there along with it. Disrupt everything, Mr. President. Just disrupt NATO, disrupt the EU, because I'm supportive of decentralization, not the centralization that EU represents. And by the way, that a lot of people, I just happened to be in Italy at the time. Oh, you just said you came from Italy. I was in Italy at the time of the switchover from the lira to the euro. And the Italians were not quite pleased with everything that was happening. And that's because, quite frankly, the political structure of the EU allows unnamed individuals whose faces the Europeans don't know to make determinative policy that affects everybody in Europe. And that's why you are seeing the Grexit vote, the Brexit vote, the Italy vote, the rise of Podemos. That's why you're seeing this, because people are naturally rejecting this kind of centralization. So to the extent that we can disrupt that plan of centralization, further centralization, that's a good thing for me.
Yeah, of course, as an anarchist, we want complete decentralization down to there's 7 billion governments on earth. Everyone's their own government, their own country, their own sovereign individual. But of course, that's going to be a process. So it is always, how do we get there? Direct democracy. Maybe Trump is helping in some ways, maybe he's not. But the fact that people are waking up is a really good sign. I guess we'll just have to see what happens. It's going to be very interesting years.
Well, now here comes, or I should say, herein lies the power of the power cells. Because at this moment, when we've got a potential disruption of everything that is status quo politics, now is the time for the people to organize. Because here's what I say, because of the way the imperial U.S. policy sort of operates, what I've said in the past is he who has a plan in the midst of chaos can win. Now, if we the people don't have a plan, then we'll get crushed by the chaos. So the power cells is a way for us to organize in the midst of all of this disruption and transition into something new. Whatever that something new is, we should and must play a role in the creation of it. And that's what the power cells allows us to do.
Yeah, I've said it a long time. Really, change in the world depends on you, every single person, and they really try to take away that power from people. They put you through the government schools, try to make you think, oh, you're not that special. All you can be is a doctor or a lawyer, the media, all that sort of a thing. And most people really just feel like powerless. But in fact, every single person is powerful. And just look at what Cynthia has done with her life and all the changes she's helped to make, and Ron Paul and so many others. And those are just individuals, and you can do that yourself in your own way, in your own community, and that's really what we need out there. Speaking of where you live, Cynthia, you've left the U.S., so you're back now visiting, but you've been in Bangladesh mostly. I just wanted to get your take on that. You coming from living in the land of the free, what's it like living outside of it? Well,
to be honest, as an expatriate in Bangladesh, I have never felt so free in my life. But at the same time, I have to be honest that during this time that I have been here, what I have seen is almost a renaissance. I do believe that there is something that is happening. And, my great friend, of course, this probably precedes you. His name is Mike Rupert, and he was like the first guy who actually, he's a former LAPD cop who was approached by CIA to help them run the crack cocaine that they were bringing into the US. And they asked him to help them do that and penetrate particularly the African-American community. So what happened to the Black community with crack cocaine is not just something that was a result of individual negligence or whatever, but it was a part of the design, a part of the plan. And so Mike Rupert told on that in public, told on the CIA, and in front of the CIA, in front of the CIA director Deutsch at the time, who was having a town hall meeting out in Los Angeles. So anyway, Mike Rupert would say, there's something moving under the carpet, right? Whenever what we now call the deep state, whenever there was, say, like a move afoot, there were deep politics that were taking place, or a deep event had just happened or was about to happen, Mike would say that there's something moving under the carpet. And that was really something that was quite ominous. But that's not what I feel in the US right now. And I'm in the South, I'm in Georgia. And to be honest, what I feel is that people, this awareness that we're talking about, this awakening that we're talking about, has people excited for the right things for a change, for change for a change, for real change for a change, for transformation for a change. And if now is the time for us to strike, if we do it, I'm even receiving, people are saying, don't go back. Well, that all has to be kind of sorted out and worked out, because of course, I was not corrupt when I was in the Congress. I have to live and I have to work in order to live, right? So if I can get my power cells idea funded, then I can come back here and I will be traveling these 50 states and putting the mechanism in place for people to be able to finally understand the role, the important role that they can play right now in the transformation of our country from something bad to something good. And so I'll be spending the month of August. Actually, I've already made too many commitments already in the month of August to do things, but my original objective was that I would do nothing in the month of August and make sure that I get that proposal written. But I have a few things that I've made commitments to do, but I still am I think I owe it to the country and to the excitement of people finally to do this, so that we can stop the divide and rule tactic of the deep state that works every time. You and I have no reason to be at each other's throats. Now is the time for us, and when I say that, I don't mean you and I, because of course that's not the case, but I mean people from vastly different walks of life. It's time for us to sit down, as I said, same room, same table, discussing positive things. And we've got behavioral sciences. We've got appreciative inquiry. We've got positive research. We've got the total quality management methodologies that are available to us in order to transform ourselves so that we can transform our country.
That sounds great. So you'll be coming back to Anarchapulco in February. Very happy to have you back. Got Ron Paul, Judge Napolitano, Doug Casey, yourself, David Icke, so many interesting people and amazing people who are all changing the world in their own ways. So really excited to have you coming back, and excited to hear that you're working on this project. I was not aware of it. So is there a place that people can go to make sure they keep on top of what you're doing and support you once you're ready?
Okay, allthingscynthiamckinney.com is my website. And there I have a little bit, I really need to update it. That'll be some of the things that I'm doing, these infrastructural things. But there is something about power cells there on the website. And I have a social media presence. I'm on Facebook and YouTube, but I'm also on Gab. I'm on Steam It, and I am on Minds, and trying to get more into the blockchain community. You guys are going to help me there and become literate in all things blockchain and cryptocurrencies. So people can reach out to me. You can send me a message directly through allthingscynthiamckinney.com. And I respond to all of them. It might take me a little time, but I respond to every one of those messages. So I look forward to coming back to Anarchapulco. Let me just tell you that my Anarchapulco 2018 experience was life-changing for me.
Wow. Glad to hear it, and thank you again so much for coming. Looking forward to you coming back. We're going to have all the links to all the stuff you're doing down below. For anyone living in the U.S., keep on top of what Cynthia's doing and see if you can try to support what she's trying to do. As I said, we're not going to get to anarchy overnight. We have to find different ways, and I think she put out a good case for how these sort of power cells and start to change people's idea of how they participate with their communities. And, of course, anything voluntary, anything like that where we're trying to at least wake people up, we want to support. So we'll have all the links down below. Really thanks Cynthia McKinney for coming on. It's been a true pleasure. And that's it for Anarchast, your home for anarchy on the internet. Peace, love, and anarchy.
Yeah.